for U.S. businesses and reducing supply chain costs, all vital parts of CBP's national security mission. This morning, I'm pleased to announce the issuance of 5 withhold release orders, or WROs, as part of our investigations conducted by the Forced Labor Division in conjunction with our partners in the public and private sector. The Forced Labor Division is part of CBP's larger trade enforcement mission. Other enforcement priorities include CBP's priority trade initiatives, such as agriculture and quota, anti-dumping and countervailing duty, import safety, intellectual property rights, revenue, textiles and wearing apparel, and trade agreements. CBP is responsible for enforcing nearly 500 U.S. laws on behalf of 47 government agencies. We remain the second largest revenue collector for the U.S. government, and last year collected approximately $52 billion in duties, taxes, and fees. CBP facilitates compliant trade, protects the U.S. economy and consumers from harmful trade practices. We enforce intellectual property laws. Last year, we seized nearly 34,000 shipments with IPR violations at a total value of $1.4 billion had the products been genuine. We enforce 14 free trade agreements with 20 countries. We are responsible for enforcing the President's trade remedies, including new tariffs and quotas. We collect anti-dumping and countervailing duties last year to the tune of approximately $24.2 billion worth of goods, and a total of 494 anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders. Against this backdrop, we have been investigating a number of potential instances of forced labor in supply chains used in making goods headed towards the United States. According to the International Labor Organization, over 24 million people are victims of forced labor across the world, trapped in jobs in which they were coerced or deceived into and which they cannot leave. Forced labor is an important priority for Customs and Border Protection. The United States should not have to compete with other countries that fail to play by the rules and seek an unfair advantage by turning a blind eye to labor abuses. Trade between nations should be fair, and profits should not come on the backs of children, slaves, or those otherwise forced to work. The cost of child labor and forced labor is simply too high. It presents a unique problem set for CBP and those organizations involved in protecting labor. Candidly, it's one of our most challenging trade enforcement issues. Forced labor can be difficult to detect because, although it is outlawed and not condoned in many parts of the world, it still occurs in the shadows and goes undetected. Those affected by forced labor are often afraid to come forward, and perpetrators benefit from their silence. Merchandise produced with forced labor is also difficult to trace through long, multi-tiered, opaque supply chains. At Customs and Border Protection, withhold release orders are issued by the Commissioner or his delegate when information reasonably but not conclusively indicates that merchandise produced by forced labor is being or is likely to be imported into the United States. Our message here is clear. If you are a trading partner that does not abide by and uphold your commitments to end child or forced labor, the U.S. will do what it takes to protect vulnerable workers from exploitation, safeguard American jobs, and create a fair and level playing field for companies and countries that do play by the rules. The prohibition against forced labor has been around since the Trade Act of 1930, and the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015 sharpened our ability to prohibit these goods from entering the country. Shipments of merchandise subject to a withhold release order will be detained. Importers have the opportunity to either re-export the detained shipments at any time or to submit information to CBP demonstrating that the goods are not in violation of our law. I'd like to give you a little more detail on the specific withhold release orders that we've issued today. The first withhold release order targets garments produced by Hetian Taida Apparel Company Limited in Xinjiang, China. CBP found evidence of forced work, excessive hours, isolation, abuse of vulnerability, little or no payment, restriction of movement, and physical and sexual violence. The second withhold release order is targeted at disposable rubber gloves produced in Malaysia by WRP Asia Pacific. CBP found evidence of multiple indicators of forced labor. WRP Asia Pacific exported approximately $79.5 million last year in disposable rubber gloves to the United States. The third withhold release order is targeted at gold mined in artisanal small mines in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. The most prevalent indicator of forced labor here is the presence of armed forces at the mines, which aligns with the International Labor Organization's forced labor indicator of intimidation and restriction of movement. Reporting indicates that between 67 and 77% of the mines have armed forces present. There is also evidence of debt bondage and sexual violence occurring in the mines. As of 2015, there were more than 800 confirmed active artisanal small mines between the provinces of North Kivu and South Kivu, with 1,574 confirmed mines throughout eastern Congo. The fourth withhold release order is targeting artisanal diamonds from the Merengue diamond fields in Zimbabwe. Instances of forced labor here have been well documented in that the police, military, and other security officers in charge of guarding the mines form illegal mining syndicates where they allow artisanal miners access to fields in exchange for bribes and a share of the fines. Once they enter into these syndicates, artisanal miners are forced to stay in them, and those who resist have been punished with physical violence, sexual violence, or other forms of punishment, such as arrest for trespassing. Our final withhold release order targets bone black, which is manufactured in Brazil by Bone Char Carvalho Ativado do Brasil. Bone black is carbon that is made from crushed cattle bones that are heated to high temperatures and then ground to a powder. This carbon powder is then used in water filtration and in sugar refining. Indicators of forced labor identified include abusive living and working conditions, restriction of movement, isolation, and debt bondage. I want to thank the very talented and hardworking team that investigated the circumstances around the allegations and worked to issue these withhold release orders, as well as those who work every day to facilitate lawful trade. It is my hope that by conducting thorough investigations, enforcing our laws, and issuing withhold release orders, that we send a clear message that CBP is diligent in targeting and preventing goods made with forced labor from entering our market. CBP encourages stakeholders in the trade community to closely examine their supply chains in all tiers to ensure that goods they are importing into the United States are not produced wholly or in part with prohibited forms of labor. By working with our partners in the public and private sector, we can ensure that we facilitate legitimate trade and protect American businesses and consumers. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
In the China case, how was that initially flagged? How did it come to CBP's attention? And do you expect that, I assume there's some kind of investigation that went on around it. Does that complicate U.S.-China trade relations at all?
So I would start by saying our job, as directed by Congress, is to enforce the law. They're very actively engaged in our investigation work and very interested in the results. There has been a significant amount of press reporting about conditions in Xinjiang province. One of those allegations in particular had very good information about the specific supply chain. Our challenge often can be linking a general circumstance of forced labor with specific imports coming to the United States. But in this case, with Badger Sportswear, we were able to make that connection. Thank you.
Do you expect it to complicate the broader trade discussions with China?
We are watching those negotiations very carefully, but I think our message here is that one of the ways that the U.S. and China can collaborate together is to ensure that forced labor are not used in those supply chains. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Can you give us any more information about the monetary value of the imports that were coming in with forced labor? You gave 79.95 for the rubber gloves, but no figures for the others.
I did. In many cases, there is not a great deal of activity, and certainly not activity that is identified as gold, for example, or diamonds from the artisanal mines. Very often those products are sent elsewhere for further processing, and so part of our challenge is finding them as they come into the United States. But legitimate values are relatively low. Are there any questions online or on the phone?
Hi, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry. If you can speak just a little louder, thank you.
Oh, sure. This is Anna Swanson at the New York Times. I wondered if you could just reiterate a little bit about the products that were found in Xinjiang. So you said it was Badger Sportswear. Can you just talk a little bit about the conditions that you found there? Thanks.
So actually, I should clarify, the company that we are actually targeting is Haitian Taida Apparel Company in Xinjiang. We found evidence of forced work, excessive hours, isolation, little or no payment, and restricted movement, along with physical and sexual violence. And as you may know, those indicators are laid out by the International Labor Organization, and we track fairly closely to the framework that the ILO uses to assess instances of forced labor.
Okay, thanks. And will you be putting out a report with this information?
We will put out a press release with most of the details that I've just walked through. Questions?
None of these shipments have been detained. I assume, have all of them been detained?
So actually, the process is that once the commissioner or his delegate, in this case me, signs off on a withhold release order, that results in guidance going out to our ports of entry. So as shipments come into the United States, we will flag them for inspection to confirm that they are within the scope of the withhold release order. That order then directs the ports of entry to detain those goods for further investigation. All right. Thank you very much for your attention, and we would be happy to have further discussions, but I appreciate your attention today, and we're very pleased to have issued 5 withhold release orders. Thank you.